So I've seen a lot of talk about people struggling to read and linking this to ADHD. Common reports go something like starting at the top of the page and then reading through a whole paragraph and then just having to go right back to the top and try it again and again and never really comprehending. Well, there's been some tricks I've learned over the years with my own struggle with comprehension that I'd like to share in this video. So we're going to be starting with a book called Crazy Like Us by Ethan Waters. It's an exploration of how Western paradigms of psychotherapy have merged into other cultures around the world. Now, to do this, I try to read with a pen, or at least just read sentence by sentence. And the way this goes is to go through the whole sentence and then condense it to make sure that you've absorbed each sentence before moving on. I'll give an example. The Western experts leading these sessions often reported frustrations at having to school their trainees in the most basic concepts of Western therapy. So these Western therapists that were leading the sessions were frustrated at having to teach these trainees in what they thought were very basic concepts of therapy, but they were actually Western-centric. Mary Katan, who was part of another training effort in Sri Lanka, found the locals eager but psychologically unsophisticated. So Mary Katan was obviously quite biased in thinking that the Sri Lankans were psychologically unsophisticated. They were so interested in giving practical advice, she recounts, that their listening skills were not very good, so she thinks their listening skills are not good. So she's ignoring the fact that the Sri Lankans give more practical advice in the way they do therapy, and she was saying that their listening skills are not good. More problematic still was the fact that the local trainees were not particularly self-aware. So again, more bias here. She was saying it's problematic that the local trainees were not self-aware. So this whole paragraph is now condensed for me, and it says that these Western experts are coming over to Sri Lanka and they're kind of projecting their own beliefs onto how people should be learning and should be performing therapy. So now I can move on to the next paragraph. Okay, let's try another paragraph. Sumatipala pointed out that many Sri Lankans who had never participated in a research study before didn't fully understand that they had the choice not to answer the questions of the investigators. So Sumatipala is pointing out that many of these Sri Lankan citizens are unfamiliar with these participation in these research studies, and they weren't fully informed on how to answer the questions. They felt they had no choice but to answer the questions of the investigators. So the next sentence, more disturbingly still, locals sometimes assumed their participation would lead to some financial assistance or other help. So, quite disturbingly, some of these locals were motivated by financial assistance to answer these questions. From the perspective of the victims, it made sense that those gathering detailed information about their hardships would be connected to some form of assistance down the road. So this kind of confirms the last sentence. From the perspective of the victims, they had motivation to answer these questions for further assistance. Why else would they be so interested? Here's another paragraph. The very act of asking survivors to describe their psychological response to a horrible experience by choosing among only a few reactions would seem to unavoidably bias the outcome. So this sentence is saying asking these survivors to describe their psychological responses with only a few reactions would seem to create biases in the way that they're going about this. And this is kind of a problem with psychological diagnosis in general, is asking only a set of 20 or 30 questions to determine someone's incredibly complex psychological state. This makes sense to me now that I've read this. Adding to this problem was the common misperception on the part of those being studied that answering such questions correctly would result in assistance for oneself or one's family. So this is kind of getting back to what we were learning before, that there's motivation for somebody to participate in the study to get financial assistance, and also to answer questions correctly. So now that I've read this whole paragraph, I can see that there's unintentional biases in the way they're going about this, and also motivations for people to answer questions in a way that'll get them help. And so this is how we'll go through reading books, essentially. This is how we make it through a whole page, going sentence by sentence, and then condensing the whole paragraph after we read each sentence. I hope this has made sense, and I hope this can help you start to read books, because book reading is one of the greatest privileges of the human experience, in my opinion. This is a wonderful way to bring in information. And we don't want to just say that because we're struggling to absorb something, that means for sure that we cannot do it. And that also doesn't mean that we should attribute it to ADHD or dyslexia. There are many forms of dyslexia and ADHD that can be very much improved upon. And this is one way to improve upon it. So I've also noticed with a lot of people that I work with and in public areas and on social media, people will report just having an erratic mind, or they're pulled towards the past or pulled towards the future in their thoughts, or too easily distracted to be able to make it through these pages like this. And what this leads one to conclude is that it's just going to be like that forever. And I'm here to tell you that's not the case. At least it does not have to be. This is something that the Buddhists called the monkey mind, And this has been a term that's been around for thousands of years to describe how the brain can indeed encounter these erratic states of not being able to be mindful in the moment. And of course, this sounds woo-woo, or it sounds easier said than done, but it is able to be done. It is a practice that we can bring ourselves into via mindfulness training, and one of the most effective methods for that is indeed mindfulness meditation. So I'll describe this briefly, and I plan to go into more detail on this in a series on meditation that I'll do for my YouTube channel and other platforms. So the idea here is to essentially, do the deep breathing exercises and breathe slowly and watch your thoughts come to you. Close your eyes and watch a thought arise and try to hold that thought. And when the thought drifts away, try to bring it back gently. Try to hone the thought as it's drifting. Examples of this have been like training a puppy. So when a puppy starts to walk away, you don't want to like yank it back and violently try to wrestle it into submission or whatever. And you don't want to just ignore it and let it go wander off and do its own thing. You kind of want to gently corral it. You kind of want to gently train it like you would the mind. So the idea is that, well, the brain works like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it, that whole thing. This is a practice that when you practice it more, it will get better, and your ability to stay present in the moment and stay focused on each one of those lines will improve. You don't have to submit to the diagnostic default, as I call it, the idea that once we're presented this diagnostic criteria, like the term ADHD or dyslexia, that is something that we must watch out for being beholden to, and then we can do nothing about once we've acquired it. Anyways, we'll talk about more of this in the future. I appreciate y'all watching. Feel free to subscribe if you feel this video has been valuable. I'll see you the next time.